Right, hello everybody and welcome along to this video. Mr. Johnson teaches how to write a poetry comparison. This is part of your GCSE English Literature and this will feature on paper 2, the poetry. You'll find it in section B. And of course, just to recap for you, this is where the exam board will print a question and they will print one of the poems that's named in that question, and it is up to you to choose a second poem that you would compare with it that has a similar theme. We'll be going through a little bit of that in this video, but the main focus here is how to write a comparison and get started with that. As with all good revision videos, and particularly mine, I encourage you to have a pen and paper ready, please, and be ready to pause this video so you are actively revising, not just sitting back and not really paying attention. So let's get going. This video is assuming that you know the poems firstly and are happy to make comparisons between them. If you're not really confident in how to bring two things together, and particularly how to bring two poems together, comparing them, then go back. The video that you see on the screen there is one of my other videos on this channel, and that is basically more focused on the planning of comparing poems, whereas this video is writing about them. So the video there is about actually how to actually start thinking about making comparisons and planning those. This video assumes that you can do that step and then is much more about writing up your thoughts. So if you need to, go back now and watch that video first. If you are confident, you don't need to know every single one of the 15 poems from Power and Conflict inside out, but I'm going to sort of assume that you know the poems as I talk about them in this, rather than you don't know what I'm talking about. So once again, let's get moving with this. Starting to unpick the trigger words is something I talked about in my previous video. Trigger words being the ones that fire something up, that make something happen. So when you see the word compare, that should trigger the thought of, right, I'm bringing those two poems together. The ways, that is the trigger for going about the methods. So how do the poets do it? Do they both use sibilants? Do they both use imagery? Does one use imagery and one use personification? The methods is the ways. And then the green bit there is the steer, like almost like, if you like, the key phrase or the key bit of the question that you're actually going to focus on. So in this case, it's the effects of war. This is the question I'm going to run with in this video. So the first step we would have if we were faced with that question in our exam would be, once we've read it and once we've written down what those trigger words are doing, I always encourage my classes to do that. So whenever it has the ways, I get them to write an arrow from it with the word methods next to it. Once you've done those steps, your next decision is, right, which other poem am I going to choose that has the effects of war in it? So I'm not going to be choosing Checking Out My History. I'm not going to be choosing Tissue. War narrows these down into a few key poems, and for the argument here, I'm going to go with War Photographer. That's what that image is signifying to us. I think War Photographer is another good choice, and I'll explain why that is in a second. But what I've done there is that's the process that's gone through in my head, and you need to be having those same processes, which means you need to practice looking at exam questions and making decisions as to which poems you think compare well. So with that in mind, this is something I covered in my previous video. It's a quick plan and it's going to make it really quick here. I'm not going to talk through this too much, but when I look at Remains there on the left, things that strike me are, it's a poem about PTSD. He is trapped and can't escape. His mind is his enemy. That's a key bit there in that poem. There's a lot of gory imagery. There's a lot of blood featured in there, like Blood Shadow, his bloody life in my bloody hands. But also there's a lot of repetition. The start of the poem repeats itself at the end. And if I was to do another quick plan for War Photographer, what is that poem about? Well, the photographer is reliving those experiences. As he develops those photos, those memories come back to him because he sees those images again, particularly of like the dead people who he's photographed. His mind is his enemy there as well, very similar to Remains in that sense. Already we've got a point of comparison where they are similar in some ways because both of them have mind as enemy and both of them are reliving experiences. So the effects of war are those negative memories that they've created. However, how they do it is very different. You've got gory imagery and blood, as I've said there, whereas the War Photographer, you've got negative imagery also associated with death. So there's not so much blood, but there is this sort of imagery to do with death. Remains uses lots of repetition. War Photographer has its rhyme scheme. There's an actual quite clear rhyme scheme going on through there and regular stanzas. And there are reasons for that, which are in my War Photographer video. If you want to go and watch that one, that's a good piece of revision as well. So we're assuming now that we've done this stage and we want to move on to actually writing about these poems then and how we go about that. What I've got coming up for you are some examples of not paragraphs as much as bits of paragraph that I've put together using that question. I'm going to talk about the levels. I'm going to talk about each bit and why it does and doesn't work. Pay attention and think about how you've written in the past, because you no doubt have in your English lessons written about these poems. Which of these are things that you do, and learn from the things that you need to avoid from this video. So for example, at a most simple level, if you were to write Remains is about a soldier with PTSD, in War Photographer, the photographer has bad memories. Yes, you would get some credit, but it doesn't take too much of a genius to work out that that is not a great answer if you were to write like that all the way through. If that was just your answer, that would be too limited. If you wrote in that sort of style all the way through, you are showing the most basic level of understanding, but there is no comparison there. The word comparison is one you're going to get sick of hearing in the next few minutes because I'm going to use it a lot, but there's no comparison there at all. That simply is moving from one sentence to another. The two poems have not been held up together. Like that image that I've used on this video, which has got the apple and the orange in two hands, they're being held together. These poems in that answer there are not being held together. So that would be a low level 1. And there are 6 levels, so we're not talking grades here. When your exams are marked by an examiner and also your English teachers, they are looking at a level out of 6. They divide it up into 6 bits. This would be a low level 1, assuming that the whole answer was like that. If we move forward, Remains is about a soldier with PTSD. He's here in my head. In War Photographer, the photographer sees a ghost when developing his photos. It's better in the sense of at least there's now evidence starting to appear there. There's no comments on those evidence. It's just quotes been dumped in there. But nevertheless, it's slightly better. But once again, look, there's still no comparison. The answer just moves from one sentence of one poem to another sentence about another poem. Those two are not being held together like you would with the apple and the orange. So let's move up a stage then. This is where it starts getting better. Students always say, oh, is it because it's longer? But longer answers are generally better because they've got more steps in them and they're showing more skill, just like this answer. So let's have a little look at it. Remains is about a soldier unable to live with the guilt of what he has done. Good. The writer uses war-themed imagery. Excellent. Right, now we've got a named method there. So war-themed imagery to show him trapped with his mind. Good. He's here in my head, dug in behind enemy lines. This shows he cannot get rid of his guilt. Okay, so no analysis of the quote there, but there's a comment on it. In War Photographer, Duffy has used verb choices to show the pain of war on the photographer. There's some quotes, and there is another comment about those quotes. I ask you, is that a comparison in that paragraph? The answer should be no. Look at it. It talks about Remains, and like our earlier answers, it just moves into the other one. At no point are the two poems actually held together. At no point are they talked about in the same sentence. There's no even connectives linking those together like however or similarly, which would make it slightly stronger. So as it says at the bottom there are positives, but it's still just no comparison. It might hit a level 2 out of 6 if it was to keep going like that, because we have got methods being named, we have got evidence, we have got comments on it, but it needs to be stronger in its comparison. So look at this answer. It's much better instantly from the first sentence. Both the poets explore the effect war has when you have returned home. Brilliant. That instantly makes a direct comparison. I encourage my classes, I encourage you to always start your answer with the word both. Because as soon as you write the word both, almost certainly what you write next will then be a comparison. Both the poets explore the effect war has when you have returned home. The next bit is more or less the same as it was on the previous slide, but then when you move down to the War Photographer bit, listen to how it's different. In War Photographer, Duffy also shows how the mind is an enemy, but Duffy has used verb choices to show the pain of war on the photographer. And then the next bit is exactly the same. Now this would probably move it up a level if it was to write like this throughout the answer. So it's almost the same as the previous one I showed you, which was a level 2 out of 6. The difference here is the fact that we've got direct comparison. The poets are held up in the first sentence together, and then when I've moved from Remains onto War Photographer, the poems have been held together a bit again, making a comparison. So what we have here is what they call ongoing comparison, as in it keeps happening. And that's the method I would start drawing your attention to. I would call it the also but method. Try and use the word also, then but in your next bit. So in War Photographer, Duffy has also shown how the mind is an enemy, comparison, but Duffy has used verb choices. There's a second comparison by using the words also but. Now I'm going to continue this answer a little bit more and focus on how you improve it with its analysis, but that for me is an absolute win. If you can go away from this video and try and put that into your own writing, the also but and starting off with both, then you will have learnt something, and I can almost guarantee you will start picking up marks that you wouldn't have picked up before. So let's have a look then. You're likely going to want to pause this because I'm not going to have time to talk through all of this answer here in this video. But I've got my both answer at the very beginning there. I've unpicked it slightly bit more here and actually added a little bit. I have improved this answer because of the analysis that happens after the quotes, which are a bit more embedded. I've got the same methods there that I had in my previous answers, but the analysis of the quotes is better here. I've then moved on into war photographer, and I've still got the also but method going on there, so my comparison here is strong. But the way that I have started to unpick the key word choices, so if I look at that second paragraph there about war photographer, and I'm moving down a few sentences, I've got the fields that explode and the developing photo will twist. This bit I say next is where I really start picking up marks, and for a lot of students this is the bit they really need to focus on, is trying to explore the effect of word choices. So I've written, both these verb choices suggest feelings of pain. So explode and twist, what have they got in common? Well, they're both unpleasant words. I've said they both suggest pain, and both have negative connotations. It's a very simple thing to say whether a word is positive or negative generally, but doing it and using the word connotations often will gain you marks. Like I've done there, both those words have negative connotations. They match the pain that is being felt by the photographer as they relive the experiences of war through their mind, similar to the soldier in Remains. Look how I've thrown together another little comparison at the end of my answer, and that again makes it even stronger. Now, you're likely to find other ways of analysing, and I'm hoping to put together another video which might be finished by the time you see this one about analysis and how we unpick and explode things a little bit more. For now, pause and look at that again and just reread that to yourself, and you will hopefully start seeing how you can make your answers stronger. And to summarise and to recap for you, the key points to take away from this video: unpick the question to start with, of course, and then choosing your second poem and creating that quick plan are really, really important steps. The plan being the particular one because, as I hope you saw, you start to hold the two things together, and that's where you can start choosing how you're going to make your comparisons. Then compare as you go. So not one and then the other, as we saw in the early examples of the bits I wrote, not writing about one then the other. Instead, it's the also but method, I would call it, and also starting your answer with both. So both the poems do this, however one does this, one does this. And then when you write about, let's say, Remains, and you're ready to move on to war photographer, remember to say war photographer also does something, but it, and then say what it does differently, and then you start to analyse why it does that differently. On the top right of the screen there in the yellow box is a little question for you to have a go at yourself, so you can practice putting these steps into play. Compare the ways that poets present the power of the natural world in Storm on the Island and one other poem from Power and Conflict. So that is the end of this video. Always worth going back and having another look if you're still not certain. Talk to your English teacher as well about how you do this. But if you follow some of those steps on the screen and make your writing as much as you can, like the last one, the last piece of example I showed you, then you are very likely to find your marks going up, and it would be the best thing for you to follow the advice of your teachers. Those who do generally do better. So this is it, the end of the video. Thank you very much for your time and watching this. I wish you the very best of luck when it comes to your exams, whenever that may be, whether they're practice exams or whether they're the real thing. Always do your best, keep calm, and follow the advice that you've been given. And that is the end of this, so I shall say thanks for watching everybody, and good luck and goodbye.